The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to an AWARE webinar. That's an ACICS webinar announcing, relating, and explaining. In this case, we are explaining the Campus Accountability Report and Placement Verification Program. That's known as the CAR and PVP Guidelines and Instructions. So we will be going over just the CAR and the PVP. So if you are looking for our typical AWARE webinar for the memo to the field, that will come at a later date. So for this one, we're focused on the CAR and PVP. Today's presenters will be our new interim president, Roger J. Williams, myself, Ian Harrisduck, the Associate Vice President of Accreditation and Institutional Development. We also have Dr. Taran King with us as Senior Manager, Institutional and Program Review, as well as Mr. Bill Davis, the Database Administrator. Our agenda, as mentioned, will first have a welcome from our new interim president, Roger J. Williams. Topic 1 will be focused on the Campus Accountability Report enhancements and the changes to procedures that have occurred and will occur for both the 2016 CAR, which will be due November 1st, as well as the 2017 CAR, which obviously the reporting period has started. And topic 2 will be the Placement Verification Program enhancements, also known as the PVP, and the changes and enhancements we've made for the upcoming fall evaluation cycle, as well as for the 2017 reporting period. After that, as always, we'll have questions and comments. So please have those ready. We'll, at the end, handle all the questions and comments. So please be prepared to type those up, and we'll get through as many as we can once we're through the presentation portion of this webinar. It's important to note you'll definitely want to look through the 2016 CAR guidelines as well as the program 2016 program spreadsheet. Those are available, as you see, at ACICS.org under the Accreditation tab, then the CAR Report tab, and finally the 2016 CAR Guidelines. Make sure you've taken a look at those or are taking a look at those throughout this webinar, because that's what we will largely focus on through the first part of the presentation with the Campus Accountability Report. But without further ado, I will pass it over to our interim president to give a welcome. Here's Roger Williams.
Thank you, Ian. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. This is the first time I've had a headset on like this, for over 40 years when I was working at Cape Canaveral during the Apollo mission. So that gives you an idea of how old I am. I trust this will be a session that you find not only informative, but agree with us that it's very important for our future here. This is a development that has been in the works discussions for a couple of months now. It's very important to the extent that, in many people's view, it's long overdue, including, I must say, with mine as well. And the development that we've got and that we bring to you today, we hope that with some patience and goodwill and with a good presentation on our end, that you'll come away from this with a positive view going forward on what this will do for us in the long run. This was not really built with the CAR in mind. I'm talking about the developments now, which has kind of this massive yearly look at retention and placement rates, not at a very granular level. And the granular level, I think, is really where we're ultimately going to be headed. We need to move from retention and a mass or gross placement rate, however you want to look at it, to something where we can see actual completion rates, graduation rates, and information about placement that crosses over the many months of the year, as opposed to just something large and in many ways I think not as informative as they'd like it to be even though we've made the transition to program by program at least some years ago, so that you'll actually have a tool that will work for you as well as for the accreditation teams that go out in the annual reporting, of course, that's utilized to provide us the kind of information that really speaks to the various compliance components of our criteria. We are essentially trying to adapt it, the CAR I'm speaking of now, to a long-term plan for making it into a tool for ongoing assessment of completion and placement results at a more granular level, and to better inform the internal processes program by program within your institutions that ultimately focus on cohorts that we would be identifying by the schedule to graduate month and year. My experience with this goes back many years, actually back to around 1990 with ACICS, which is the agency you may know that I headed up for 25 years before going into retirement and now being dragged out of retirement. And it works extremely well. In fact, just over the last week or so, I've had the opportunity to talk with some of my old colleagues at ACICS. And I think one of the benefits of it is that you get to see, if you really adopt the model, on a more, in this case, usually monthly basis, exactly what your completion, placement, and ultimately licensure certification rates really look like. So that instead of waiting and wondering, you really have ongoing feedback that should serve you in being able to make a better assessment of what's going on inside of your institution on a regular basis. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Ian and get into the meat of what we're currently working on. Ian?
Thank you, Roger. So as he said and highlighted, the first topic will be the Campus Accountability Report. That is our annual report that compiles all student data. So obviously, as Roger said, that's a rather large document with a lot of information per program and per student. So we can't go into a full discussion of all the CAR. We're hoping over the years that the schools have obviously got a good understanding of that. However, we do want to highlight some important changes that are happening for the 2016 CAR. And remember the changes, and we'll highlight which, but all these changes are effective for the CAR submission that will be due November 1st, 2016 in just a couple months. And I will go over the agenda of items that we will have to discuss. Please focus your questions on these changes and those once we get to the end, and those that are related to the presentation. We obviously know there may be other questions out there, but we want to have this as a focused discussion because there's a lot of detail that will be coming, and we want to be able to answer as best all the questions that are related to these topics. With that said, we have the first one is a requirement for all campuses. So we'll be discussing some changes to who and what campuses must submit a campus accountability report. Next would be some changes to the licensure exam pass rate requirement and some further information on that. We will also then go into our more sophisticated error detection process and explain kind of what you'll be seeing from a technical side when you put information in on the spreadsheet. The next discussion item will be the scheduled to graduate cohort items that have some new fields that are required for this year's submission. Next will be some changes to the placement definition. We've already had policy changes, as you all know, on July 1st to the placement definition, and we'll have some operational procedural changes based on that definition. And then finally, just a few additional changes to the CAR. So with that said, I will turn it over to Dr. King to go over the new requirement for all campuses.
Good afternoon. Beginning this year, any institutions that receive an initial grant or a new branch campus during the CAR reporting year, these campuses are also required to submit the 2016 CAR. The information reported must include all student data for the full CAR reporting period from July 1st, 2015 to June 30th, 2016. And just for reference, any campus that closes prior to November 1st of 2016, which is the submission date for the CAR, would not need to then submit a campus accountability report. Moving on to licensure pass rates. While ACICS has required licensure pass rate reporting for a few years, this year we're requiring submission of individual rates for programs over the last 3 years, whereas before we took a 3-year average. And this is only for those programs that require licensure for employment. In addition, we will be requiring an upload of documentation from each program's licensing agency, which would confirm the most current licensure pass rate reported in the campus accountability report. We are also starting an initiative to reach out to licensure agencies to collect pass rate data directly from them for further data verification regarding licensure rates.
One of the other changes in the upcoming CAR is a few changes to our data validation and error detection process. If you've submitted a CAR report over the past couple of years, you know sort of how the process works, and we will continue to offer some basic data validation at the time that you're actually filling the spreadsheet out itself. You'll be getting some immediate feedback if you've made a certain error like entering text in a numeric field, duplicating a student ID or a student name, leaving a student name field or student ID field empty, having a student enter a program or leave a program in more than one way, or failing to indicate a placement type for a graduate, or having more than one placement type. If you make an error of this type while you're filling out the spreadsheet, you'll actually get an error on the spreadsheet itself. It'll tell you what the error is, and you can correct that error before you go any further. After uploading the spreadsheet, the system will check to ensure that the beginning population from the current program matches the ending population from the previous year program. And once the upload is successful, you get some immediate feedback like program retention and placement rates. Now, what's new this year versus the past couple of years is that we'll be doing some additional data validation that will happen after you've successfully uploaded your spreadsheets. For example, we'll be checking to see if transfers in will equal the transfer out across all programs for a given institution for a particular year, and we'll also be checking for any deeper data entry issues that could cause an issue that we might have missed in just looking at the spreadsheet itself. This new process should take about 24 hours depending on the volume of schools that we'll be submitting at any given time. And once the second round of data validation is complete, you'll receive a notification that your preliminary report is ready. And as in years past, the reports won't be finalized immediately, but that'll actually happen a few weeks down the road.
Thank you to Ron and Bill for those changes. We'll go in now to the scheduled to graduate cohort. So as Roger said, and we hope you didn't cringe, we will be looking at completion and graduation rates. It's important to note for this time they will be information only for both the campus and ACICS. We are gathering this information, and we are going to ask you to do some additional work this year on the CAR, which will be required in order for us to be able to calculate a graduation rate based on the schedule to graduate cohort. So this will be at a program level graduation rate, so per program and essentially per schedule to graduate cohort. For each student, we'll be calculating that information for each student in the program. So what that means for you as the institution submitting CAR information is that there are now some new fields, as you may have noticed, on the program spreadsheet for the 2016 year. there is a new start date. We used to have the start year. Now it's specific to month and year. So we have a start date, which is in column SPD C7. So you'll have need to put in both the month and year that the student initially started. We will have the schedule to graduate cohort, which is obviously what this entire rate is based on, and a very important piece of data. And that is essentially the month and cohort, or the cohort month that the student is scheduled to graduate initially upon enrollment. So on the enrollment agreement, obviously the student is required and the institution is required to designate a cohort graduation month, even in some cases a date, and that will be what's required to be put on the spreadsheet. So that we know what the initial scheduled to graduate cohort is. Obviously, as we all know, there are changes to students that happen throughout their time at an institution. They could perhaps transfer to another program or take a leave of absence, and these things could certainly cause a change to the graduation cohort. So that next column that you see is the revised schedule to graduate cohort, which is if any student transfers from a program or takes a leave of absence, you would put in what the revised graduation cohort would be with the new month and year. And then finally, the last item is the leave of absence. We already have a transfer in and transfer out column. We did not have a specific column for noting leave of absence, so this would be similar to that, where you'd indicate a 1 for any student that took a leave of absence at any time in the year. And the CAR guidelines certainly go into more detail about what's required in each of these fields. So what we will get, with this new information is information on each student that will be able to build a beginning, ending, and revised cohort information of the student, which will allow us to calculate a graduation rate. Unlike retention and placement, which, as you all know, is calculated right on the spreadsheet for you per the formulas that we have, the schedule to graduate cohort will be done afterwards. Since it's informational piece only, we will obviously give that information back to the campus and the institution, but we will run the formula in-house to make sure we and the institution know what the graduation rate for that program is. And if, just to discuss it briefly, I don't want to go into too much detail as our guidelines and instructions will go into more, but essentially it determines how many students scheduled to graduate at the month and year that they were expected to, based versus how many withdrew, and based on that graduation and withdrawal, obviously the exclusions or waivers would still apply for withdrawal, such as health or death, incarceration, and the other normal waiver withdrawal requirements. We calculate a schedule to graduate cohort. So that is the new item, the new fields that we're hiring for the 2016 CAR. Moving on to another exciting issue of placement. As you all know, in the last memo to the field and aware webinar that we held, we made some changes to the placement definition, or actually inserted a specific definition of placement, which is working in the field of study or acquiring a credential that directly benefits the graduate's existing employment. So that's the new placement definition that's been in effect since July 1st. Based on that, procedurally, as discussed in the 2016 Campus Accountability Report Guidelines, the expectation is that for a graduate to be considered placed, their employment would be paid and intended to be continuing and, for a graduate to be considered placed, their employment must be paid and intended to be continuing and sustainable, meaning that the pay and hours that they have would intended to be both continuing and sustainable. There remain three categories for classifying place students, so that hasn't changed. The first is by title, which we all know as essentially the SIP to SOC comparison, the program code versus the occupational code. The second would be by skill, which has not changed either. There's it must be a predominant amount of skills, or the skills learned in the student's program must be a predominant component of the job, and a majority of these skills must be documented in the employer's job description. So the second definition remains the same. The third definition by benefit we've clarified with the placement definition, and focused it specifically on a student or a graduate that benefits on training received from the program in maintaining a current position with supporting promotion, pay raise, or direct benefit to job-related skills. So these are students who already had existing employment and are getting additional education and a credential in order to have one of these three items required for their placement. So either there's a promotion, in order to be promoted, the student needed to get an additional credential or this new skills, or a pay raise, perhaps in the employer job description. Pay raise is needed in order, and in order to get that, they need this education, or direct benefit to job-related skills. So something that's designated in the employer job description that states that this employer needs to get additional skills, which is the reason for the credential or education. In order to document the place by benefit, we would need a job description, letter of employment, or other documentation that verifies the direct benefits of these students. So that's the information that would be required for the placement definition. We will move on to some additional changes that Tehran will speak to.
Okay, thanks, Ian. There have been two new informational fields that were added to this year's spreadsheet. One concerning whether the student is here in the country on a visa, and the other regarding whether the student is currently receiving federal financial aid. So you would need to indicate any student who would fall in either of those categories on that particular line in your spreadsheet. Additionally, the retention and placement waiver categories used to be an individual column for every waiver. We've now condensed those into one column, and you will need to use a drop down for each cell that applies and select the specific waiver for retention where the withdrawal waivers would be listed, and for placement in that particular column.
Thank you, Tehran. So that will conclude our specific changes to the campus accountability requirement. We know there will probably be some questions based on all that information that we provided, and we will be happy to answer those as best we can once we were through topic 2 of the presentation, which is the placement verification program changes and enhancements that we've made to that program. So just to go over the agenda quickly for the PVP, and obviously this will be incorporated or as an enhancement method to the campus accountability report, so both these items are very much combined. But we'll go over just a brief introduction to the PVP. We've obviously been piloting it for some time and have been live since January 2016, so for about 8 months now. So many institutions are aware and have even gone through the PVP process. For any of those that haven't, I'll give a quick introduction to the PVP process, and then as well the PVP guidelines, so the requirements, and it's another spreadsheet that's required to be uploaded for institutions. Then we will get into the changes of the PVP program, the first being the requirement for the fall 2016 on-site visits, and for any school that's listening that has a fall 2016 visit upcoming, you will definitely want to pay attention to some of the changes that we're doing with the placement verification. And then finally, all institutions will certainly want to listen to our last point of the placement verification for each campus each month. So without further ado, I will get into the introduction of the PVP, which, as I said, has been live since January 2016. The focus to this point of the PVP has been ensuring and verifying placements for a randomly selected group of institutions, as well as any at-risk institutions that may be on our new at-risk institution group, and ensuring that we have verified placement information for those campuses and those graduates at those campuses. The PVP essentially verifies institutionally provided placement data via an email to the graduate and/or employer, and if necessary via a telephone. So what that means is when the institution submits the placements to ACICS, we have an automated email that goes out to both the graduate and employer, and we can receive information back from the graduate and or employer to determine whether what the institution provided was accurate, and then what we have been doing for the last 8 months and even before that with the pilot program is calling any graduate and or employer that has not provided an answer to further verify that. I am going to get out of the spreadsheet for just a second as I go into the PVP, before I go into the PVP guidelines, to show you, for anyone that has not seen it, what the PVP, what our PVP system looks like. So for those that have seen it and know it, this is actually the administrative side, so you're getting the back end that we see here at ACICS, and I've just, of course, picked a test institution, but this is essentially the information that comes in. It has, from the spreadsheet provided, it has the student's name, their email, the submitted date, as well as the name of the employer. So that's the graduate information. This is the employer information. This is test information, obviously, so it would have whatever the company is, the contact, and the email. It has the placement date as well as the program. And then this side is the verification information with, for our side, how many calls that has been made to the graduate employer. And then here's the important information, and I'll explain in a reason why I'm going into such depth to show you this. It will be important for you all to kind of know this system, and we'll have more guidelines, of course, about this. But there's the student. This is obviously whether the student said yes or no. We have a green check mark if they did or not. The employer, the same thing. There's a request for call, as well as some further information that can be submitted by the student or employer, and then we have a comment field over here. So this is just to give you kind of a preview of the PVP system for any of those that have done it. This should look relatively familiar to you. Let me go back here into the presentation, and it started over, sorry. Thank you for bearing with me with that. So going into the PVP guidelines. So I've showed the PVP system. The PVP guidelines, essentially it's relatively similar to the CAR, where there's a spreadsheet that's required to fill out. It's all the fields that you had just seen there: the student name, the email address, the employer information, how the student was placed by title, by skill, or by benefits, as well as some program information of the student, and importantly, a unique student ID. So it will be very important for all institutions to have a unique student ID for every institution, and that student ID obviously should match whatever's submitted on the CAR, which also requires a student ID, versus what's submitted on the PVP. That must match and will be very important in order to validate each. The placement classification, as I said, and appropriate information must be included by title, by skill, or by benefit. And then it will be very important to have the correct contact information for a graduate employer. And we know how difficult that is, but that will be extremely important in order to verify both graduate employers. So the onus will certainly be on the institution to make sure they maintain and have the appropriate information so that when an automated email goes out to the graduate employer, that they'll be able to respond. And all the reasons for saying this is because we have made and are requiring some enhancements to the PVP program. We have been testing it out, as I mentioned, over the last couple of years, and have been live now for many months, and are ready to kind of enhance the program, starting with the fall 2016 on-site visit. So as you know, typically when we do verification, we do it based on an annual campus accountability report. But as Roger mentioned in his opening, we are moving more towards more granular data and more specific information. So for those doing the fall 2016 cycle, you'll be required to submit this placement verification data. You'll be required to submit the spreadsheet and have all the students that were placed between January 1st, 2016 through June 30th, 2016 on that spreadsheet and uploaded. That's essentially, of course, half the 2016 CAR year and the much more recent half, so that we will have much more recent data in order to validate. So note that for any institution that's having a visit, you will get further guidelines, and it will come through your coordinator and through our typical memo process. We'll have an addendum to that memo, so for any school that's awaiting information, and we know some visits are happening over the next couple weeks, we will provide specific information to each institution that explains that process and the requirements for meeting it prior to the visit. And what we will be doing per our normal PVP process is sending out automated emails to each graduate and employer to verify placement. So we will use the existing infrastructure that we have to send out the emails for those students that have been placed. And we will get information over the weeks, the couple of weeks before the visit happens. And as I showed you, we'll hear information from both the student, the graduate and/or employer about whether that student was placed or not, or essentially meets the information that the institution had provided. Then we will continue to use, which you are all aware, I am sure, of our data integrity reviewer, the DIR reviewer. They will be the individual on site that will contact the student for anyone that doesn't meet the standard. So that's what the DIR will be doing, is contacting them, and then the DIR will also verify licensure exam pass rates. So that will be a supplemental project for the DIR individual on site. This is important to note that it will be much more timely information for placement verification. Obviously, we will have information over the past year, so students that would be placed in, just a few months ago will be the ones that are being validated, rather than with the old system of verifying the campus accountability report on site, which in some cases was a year to 18 months old. So we'll have much more timely information for not only for the PVP process, but also for the DIR individual. That's an enhancement that we've made since the spring cycle, that we know we were contacting graduates and employers, and that was a struggle for both the DIR as well as the institution to maintain that information for such a long time. So having much more timely data will not only help ACICS, better validate information, but it will help the institution be able to maintain that information for not as long. So that is the 2016 on-site visit requirements, and more information, as I said, will come to each individual institution that's handling that. Now, to save a very exciting enhancement to the CAR and PVP for last, the 2017 CAR, which, as we know, the period has already started. We're about a month and a half in from July 1st, 2016, which is the starting point of the 2017 CAR period, which will, of course, run through June 30th, 2017. We are making some changes to the requirements, and this is very much a part of what Roger had detailed at the beginning, with more often, more timely, more recent information that we'll be receiving, and starting with the placement process, where we will be doing the placement verification program essentially every month for every campus. Will be required to submit the PVP for all placed graduates that happened in that month. So whoever had a placement date of, in using the first example of July, will have to submit all of their July placements per campus every month, and that will occur 30 days after the end of the month. So we know July is already through. You've already placed some students perhaps on the 2017 or obviously certainly on the 2016 CAR. And just as a point of information, we won't differentiate between the 2016 and 2017 CAR for the PVP upload process. So you won't need to determine whether the student's on the 2017 CAR or the 2016 CAR. We're asking you to supply all placed graduates, regardless of what CAR period they graduated in, into the PVP spreadsheet. And we will be able, there's a graduation date now on the PVP spreadsheet, which will differentiate, of course, whether the student was on the 2016 or 2017 CAR, and that's another reason why the unique student ID is so important in order to better validate the student that's on the PVP versus the CAR. So with that said, coming up now in just a couple of weeks on August 31st, and we will have more detailed information out to you on PVP guidelines. If you looked at our website and have been seeing it, we've already kind of launched the note that of the PVP process and highlighted it on the main page of our website, so you've seen that and can go through the guidelines and spreadsheet of that. So every institution will be required to provide us all of their July 2016 placements coming in August 31st. So please note that. And then upon submission, we will run through, as I've detailed now throughout this whole PVP presentation, the automated process where emails will go out to each graduate and each employer to verify the placement data. Emails will and can be sent multiple times to ensure receipt by the graduate and employer. Now, for the very important information of what we will be doing with that 2017 placement verification information and why it is so important to know this PVP process extremely well, and the data that you'll be submitting, is because, and per discussion with our council in the August council meeting, we're having a procedural change that will require all placements listed on the CAR. So the 2017 Campus Accountability Report must be verified by either the graduate and or employer of that placement. So in order for you to be able to check that the student was placed, either by title, by skill, or by benefit, we must have back in our placement verification process, our program system, that either the graduate or employer has verified placement. So that's why it is so important to have correct contact information for the graduate and employer. Make sure you have the correct individual at the employer's organization to be able to verify that information, so that this can be confirmed. Then obviously institutions will need to make the graduates and employers aware of this, that they will receive an email from this placement verification program, and that they will need to respond to it, and of course verify placement if that is indeed the case. So you will need to ensure that the graduate and employer are aware that an email is coming, and of course the graduate and employer will respond either in the affirmative or not. And then of course if the graduate or employer do not confirm the placement, then that of course cannot be considered a placement. It's only those in the affirmative for the graduate and or employer. The institution, and why I showed you the system, is that you'll have the ability to review results of the PVP program, so you'll know which students were able to, which students confirmed and which students had not, and per your existing relationships with those graduate and student institutions, you'll be able to reach out if needed to note that another email will be coming in order to confirm or verify the placement. And then what will happen at the end of the in November 2017 is we will validate the CAR to make sure that only students that were verified through the PVP process are the ones that were placed on the Campus Accountability Report as placements. So that is the very important procedural changes coming up for the 2017 CAR and the PVP that will happen every month. So that will be the end of our presentation. We know we have a lot of questions up here, so I will try and manage the questions and farm that out to those that we think can answer them. So let me just go through quickly and read some that we have to make sure, and then I will be able to answer them.
Thank you. First question on page 18 of the new CAR guidelines, there's a formula for placement. Is the V supposed to be a U? Is this a typo? No, it is supposed to be V, not placed.
So we have a question which could be expected. Why are the changes coming out after the report year has ended? While we haven't submitted our report to you yet, we have finished it for 2015-2016 since it ended 6 weeks ago. We do know, obviously, that the reporting period has changed, or the reporting period has ended, and we do know this is a lot of new information. Specifically with the new fields for graduation, the new fields for visa students and financial aid students, which is one of the reasons why we're calculating it for informational purposes first, to get a sense of what the data is out there. However, we felt, as Roger stated, that it was extremely important to start gathering this data, and we couldn't wait until a full year for the 2017 Campus Accountability Report to come out. We need to have cohort level data in order to start providing information for both completion and eventually placement, and I'll let Roger elaborate on that.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. And if I could just elaborate on something that I trust is obvious to all of you, is the status that we're on with the U.S. Department of Education, of which most of it focused on whether or not we could come into compliance in a 12-month period. And that's the issue that we're hoping to ultimately prevail on. But at this point, the answer from the department was no. And we don't have time, frankly, to gear this up over years like so many policies often are. I know that there are probably those of you out there who are looking to sort of drink this in bit by bit and feel, or gulp by gulp would be the better metaphor, and feel like we've handed you a fire hose, and I'm sorry for that, but we really do need to move this along. And I think if you will be patient and if you will try your best to approach this with the most positive attitude possible, you will ultimately find that while it is a lot of work at first, once you get into the pattern and more regularly update this information, you're going to find, and I've based this on 25 years of experience, both running a school and running an accrediting agency, that we're using a very, very similar format that's been well vetted over time. You will find that this is beneficial to the way you monitor your own processes internally, as well as giving us a better picture with more informative data to really make good decisions on the compliance issue relative to your accredited status. Aaron, Ian, where am I getting Aaron from?
Thank you, Roger. We have a number of questions, so I'm sorry if this will be sporadic. We'll try and go in order as were stated to us, so we might be on different topics, so excuse me if we're jumping from item to item. And of course, we'll read through all these questions and provide answers to each of them, since this is obviously important procedural changes and something that the institution will need to know about in order for us to get correct and useful information. The first one is what schools should do when the licensing agency will not provide licensure pass rate data to the school. We know that that may be some institution in some situations, and there may be some licensing agencies in certain areas that don't have kind of the administrative capability to provide this information data to the institution. So we will note that. We are hoping that you can provide whatever the oversight agency has. If the oversight agency does not have any information, they should be gathering the information from some point, and there should be some document either from the school or from the agency that can be provided. And you may at the least certainly want to contact the agency and make sure that you can provide whatever information they have, and if they state explicitly that they don't give you that information, that might be something to upload as well. All right, get a copy of the letter that states that they don't have that information. And then Taran has a question she'll answer, so I'll pass it over to her.
The next question is, do schools applying for the first time but not yet accredited have to submit a CAR? No. Schools that are applying or going through their initial application submit an initial grant or initial CAR, which is completely separate from those that are submitted for our currently accredited agencies. Institutions. The next question is, if we have questions when reporting on the CAR, whom do we contact? You can contact me. I will get back to you as quickly as possible. Please keep in mind that I am one person and trying to field questions from a lot of schools, so I will get back to you as quickly as I possibly can.
Just to elaborate on Taran's answer for her second question too, we will be getting out, we have guidelines and we'll be getting out more information. Obviously there will be some new changes to the CAR, and please read through the full detailed CAR guidelines before asking those questions. There are a lot of your questions can hopefully be answered through that. We go point by point and column by column to explain what information needs to be provided for that. And as Taran had mentioned in the first one, obviously we're not accepting new initial applicants, but for those that were already in the process, that is the point that there's initial CAR, and it should be noted, as Taran said, and reiterated, that for any institution that got their initial grant in the CAR reporting period, I want to emphasize this again, you will need to provide a full campus accountability report in November 1st, 2016. So if you were just accredited at the April meeting, we will need a full CAR report for those institutions, so they need to be listening and going through all this. The next question we have is, does ACICS intend to establish a minimum required graduation rate? If so, when will move information about the requirement and timing become available? We certainly intend to. There's obviously further discussions that need to happen. At this point, we are gathering the information in order to calculate it come November 1st, and we will certainly provide more information when a required graduation rate or a standard is set by ACICS. There's another question of, can you provide more information? What would constitute as an approved leave of absence? The institution should have a leave of absence policy, and it should be written. Obviously, the department, if you're a Title IV institution, also has requirements for leave of absence. So those are certainly things that the institution needs to be aware of and document. That's another important piece of this, that the institution should be documenting these things. And then if we have a request for a leave of absence, if the institution said this student had a leave of absence, then there would be obviously specific documentation that ACICS could review to ensure that that student did have a leave of absence. Trying to look through some more. I'll give it over to Tehran. It's tough to answer and then read, so here's Tehran.
There's a question that states, how does it affect the 11/1/16 due date if a preliminary CAR takes 24 hours to validate? I just want to be clear, it does not take 24 hours for your submission. After your submission, there is a data check on the back end to validate what you have submitted. After you submit, you are able to see your retention and placement rates. If there are issues once the validation has taken place and there are some issues that are highlighted, then you will then be contacted to be told what things are incorrect and need to be fixed. But that won't stop you from submitting on or being recognized as submitting on the 1st.
Let me just, there's one question after that. Is there an established graduation cohort threshold in place for this reporting period? As I mentioned, we're certainly looking at that information, but there is not anything that's been set or any standard that we have specific for graduation rate. And then we have another question kind of related, and not surprisingly, a lot about the schedule to graduate cohort. So I'm going to read the question and let Roger answer. Which is, in the revised schedule to graduate cohort, the instructions talk about transferring programs or leave of absence. Do we enter the revised date if they failed a class and had to repeat? So Roger will answer that question.
Yes, this is a question that comes up all the time. It's actually quite simple. If a student fails a course but they repeat it, they simply move to a different schedule to graduate cohort date. And so if the course is a 1-month course and they're originally in the January cohort scheduled to graduate, meaning that they started the last year, obviously at some time, they may now be moved to the February cohort if it only took a month to restart and get into line with the scheduled graduate date that they now would have, given that they repeated the course. And that also goes, by the way, with transfers. If you had a student that transfers in from another program, from another school at some point, you can put them into that cohort, and so the number actually in the schedule to graduate now has gone up somewhat from what it actually started with. If they transfer out of one, or if they take a leave of absence out of it, they remove themselves from that cohort, but they have to go into another cohort someplace, otherwise they're a drop.
Thank you, Roger. And of course, as with everything with a new scheduled to graduate cohort, the institution will need to have specific documentation for all this, so that when ACICS goes on site after we have this information, we can verify all the changes to the schedule to graduate cohort information. There's another question about standards and percentages for graduation rates. I think I've answered that you can expect that to come, but we don't have anything specific right now. There's a question that I would definitely like to answer. Are we still allowing for student attestations for place by benefit and waivers? No. The simple answer is no. The place by benefit should be those students that are in existing employment, and the documentation required to have those students placed is something externally from the employer, either by either through a job description or a letter of employment, or something else specific from the employer that documents that this student took this credential in order to maintain their existing employment and get some sort of job-related benefit, like a promotion or a pay raise. Obviously, this is a category that will happen much less than the students who are placed by title and by skills. Obviously, if the student took a program and then is in a job that uses a predominant amount of their skills, that would be the placement classification to put that student in. So the by benefit is essentially only for those students that had existing employment and are getting specific job-related benefits in the employment that they had already been in, so that they're going to school for that reason in order to get further skills in their current employment. Let me see if there's another question. How do you expect us to get some information from our students? Do you have strategies for what example? What is your? Do you feel? Sorry, I'm quickly reading over this because I'm trying to get. Do you feel comfortable sharing that? Okay, I think that was a specific question for a specific individual. I will handle that one off-site. Sorry. What information is required in a letter from the employer? Simple verification, salary, or reference to your classifications. Right. So there needs to be some direct benefit. If there's a promotion or pay raise, that information needs to be detailed on the job description or a letter of employment. I understand that you probably wouldn't be able to get numbers, but there should be some verification that the individual got a direct benefit from the existing employment that they were already in. I will pass it off to Roger, who looks like he wants to say something. So.
Yeah, if I could just offer 2 cents to this. If you really want to do this, the best approach is to get an employer, the student's employer now, graduate's employer more correctly, to give you a little letter that says how pleased they are with them and that their training was so impressive that they have given them a promotion or a pay raise or something. You're going to have to come up with some documentation. This is one of the more frequently abused categories based on a lot of experience that I've had. And you just have to be very careful so that we don't fall into any traps of wishful thinking posing instead of what we actually can document somehow. So to the extent you can get an employer to do it, I suppose the next case might be a student themselves who makes the case for you, but you really need to have documentation.
So there's a question on what does sustainable refer to in employment. So the question or the requirement states that they must be paid. It must be intended to be continuing and sustainable. So that essentially looks at both the factor of the time frame from which the graduate is employed, so that it's not an extremely short-term or not a short-term at all placement, that it is intended to be continuous, and then intend to be sustainable is something that obviously an individual can make a living off. We're not obviously defining what that is, but it's not something where an individual works so part-time, 3 to 5 hours a week or something, that it's not a sustainable employment. So we don't have specific requirements as of yet for what that is, but you can certainly expect that it's intended to be both sustainable in the amount of hours they're working as well as continuing in how long that is, that it's a long-term, intended to be a long-term position. Roger has another, he's laughing at me.
Well, the laughter is because I've heard of agencies that have treated one day as employment. We've chosen the word sustainable, thinking that we're all working with professionals here and that will resonate for you. There are agencies, and Asset, one I was formerly with, had a 30-day requirement, which I think is perfectly acceptable, and I would think that most people would find that credible. There are also those who would probably fall down and cry about it. So we're trying to make an accommodation here that I hope that everyone will take in that spirit. But if you end up with placement rates that are so brief, and we do know that students start and get fired within a few days or walk away from the job, those things happen, but then of course when you want your placement department to get hold of them and get them to another job and get themselves placed properly. So I think sustainable was a well-chosen word, but it's only going to work if people take it seriously enough to actually make sure that what they're documenting really is credible.
So before we get back into some more questions on that, let me see if I can handle a few PVP questions. I want to make sure we get to those and aren't cut off for time before that happens. We certainly have a number of questions to still answer. One is regarding the PVP form. What would the placement date for the graduate be when it was placed through benefit? Excuse me. That is a good question. It would be obviously after the student's graduation, even though they had an existing employment. So it would most likely probably be the graduation date if that student still had that employment, and then when you should have received documentation that there was specific benefit from this employment. There was another question about the upcoming fall cycle, so I definitely want to make sure those questions are answered. So when institutions that are not going through the fall 2016 process required to submit the PVP, yes, so every institution is required to submit the PVP moving forward from July 1st, 2016 on. Every month on, you'll be submitting it 30 days after. So that's for every institute, every accredited campus that's accredited with ACICS at that time period. For those that are in the fall cycle, on top of that, you'll also have to submit for your upcoming visit the PVP spreadsheet for a compiled PVP spreadsheet for all the students that were placed between January 1st, 2016 and June 30th. So January through June, those 6 months will be required to submit all those placements for the upcoming visit, and you'll again get more information in the visit memo that will be provided by your accreditation coordinator. We have a question, a good one on licensure exam. How will the data integrity reviewer verify licensure exam pass rates, contact students or boards or both? We'll be getting, one of the main things will be to verify the information that's on the oversight agency. So as much as that information is public, that will be an important part of the process in order to gather that the information that was provided in the most recent CAR, most recent information that we have matches the oversight agency. And then there will be further review. They won't necessarily contact oversight agencies, but there certainly could be contacting of students to make sure that that student passed that particular licensing exam. There's a number of questions. One is another question about placement by benefit. Obviously, there are a lot of questions on this. We, as Roger had mentioned, obviously being placed by title and by skill are the two most frequent categories of placement that will take place. There's a question, though, on promotion, and if that has to be within the graduate's field of study. If it's within the graduate's field of study, they probably wouldn't be placed by benefit. They'd be placed either by title or by skill. So this is only for students, obviously, that are outside their field but needed either a higher credential, say an associate's or a bachelor's degree, in order to maintain employment or in order to get a promotion, that it was required that they had this higher credential. That essentially is what the by benefit category is for those students that are getting a direct benefit that the employer can document, but it's not something, they didn't get the education specifically within the field, but they got it in order to get the benefit by promotion or pay raise in the job that they had already had. Here's a question that I'm hoping Roger can answer. So I'll put him on the spot. There's a mention that the grad date, so the schedule to graduate cohort, being on the enrollment agreement is required. Is that something that's new in the criteria, that the enrollment agreement should be, or the schedule to graduate cohort should be on the enrollment agreement?
Well, this has been a requirement since the beginning of time. I don't understand the question. If you weren't a Title IV school, you might not know this, but any Title IV institution knows that you have to have a projected graduation date. Maybe you didn't like the fact that it was called schedule to graduate, but it's a projected graduation date that has to be put on the enrollment form.
There is a question regarding how is a retention waiver defined. Retention and waiver, I want to just say that those are the 4 columns that used to be separate. So you're talking about withdrawing due to active military service, enrolling in an institution with common ownership, withdrawing due to incarceration, or withdrawing due to death. Those are the 4 categories that will be considered a retention waiver, which do not count against the school's retention rate.
There's a question, it's not directly associated to the information we had, but there's a question on when a student decided to continue his or her studies from practical nursing to essentially a bridge program from a practical nursing to registered nursing. Will that be considered placement? That's obviously not a placement. They're not placed in a job. We do have an allowance for a student that is continuing education in a program that's over 300 hours, that they can be waived because rather than being placed, they've continued their education. So that would be essentially not applicable for further education. There's a question on the reporting of students during the annual reporting. Since the waiver columns now require selection from a drop-down menu, we still be able to copy and paste the waiver category into the new spreadsheet. We report a number of student records, and it will be a challenge to have to select an individual retention or placement category for each record. Yes, the student, you will need to do a drop-down. There are a number of additional things that we will require institutions to do. One of those things, obviously, is to gather information about, which you should already have, as Roger said, but gather information about the scheduled to graduate cohort date. That's going to certainly take time. We understand that. If that's not already in your database or information that you have, to gather that and then track the student along with their cohort rate, whether there's been any revisions to the cohort date for the reasons that we've mentioned. So that's one additional item that we certainly are requiring institutions to do. Another one is to have the drop down. It will be another measure to ensure that students have the correct waiver for retention replacement. We understand it may be a challenge to get that in. And we certainly know that we got the spreadsheet out, but you still have a few months obviously to get that information in there. So yes, it's a requirement to have the drop down. That's how we'll be calculating the rates. So please make those system changes as necessary. Let's see if there's another. Yeah. Right. So we have a question. We have a question on the month. So this question specifically is when we enter a month, it must be the month of graduation. There's a number of categories that require now a month and a year. So starting with that, the scheduled to graduate cohort is the month that they've scheduled to graduate, not the month necessarily that they did graduate. It's what they've scheduled to graduate, what's on their enrollment agreement. If anything changed and you have documentation to prove that, then you can put it in the revised schedule to graduate cohort. A separate question, which may be confusing the two, is the month or the date of placement. There's a separate one, obviously, so there's the graduation date, and separate from that, there's a requirement to put the placement date on the placement verification program, which of course is a separate issue, and that would of course be the date, as noted, that they gain their job, and then the fact that we have 30 days after that required to provide the information allows for any internal verification that the institution has, as well as to ensure that the student does have some continuing employment at the institution. So that's why we're requiring that the placement be 30 days after the end of the month. I'll keep going. Let me see. So if a grad is placed based on skills, does the campus have to have a copy of the job description verifying those skills, or is a verification form signed by the employer sufficient? There should be something, if it's not immediately obvious that the skills are in that program, there should be some documentation that states what the skills are, and it should be noted. If the verification form signed by the employer lists the predominant skills, that would certainly be a benefit. So we are looking for some documentation on how to verify those skills, and that's of course for when we go in and verify. Though I should note, documentation of course is extremely important, but we also have our placement verification process, which indicates the title, the skills, or the benefit, and that's will be an important part to verifying placement, that both the student and or employer verify that, so that they have noted and validated that this is a correct placement. I've been talking for a while, so I'm going to let Tehran, I'm going to catch a breath and let Tehran answer some questions.
Thank you, Ian. Please review the licensure passage requirement. Is ACICS now calculating a 3-year average based on the submitted licensure data? No. We're no longer calculating an average. We are asking for the last 3 years of information, licensure information separately, but any actions that will be taken on a program whose licensure is below would be just on the current year's licensure information. There was also a question for regarding the program sheets. When will they be available? We are still doing testing in our system to ensure that when we go live, everything is on the up and working properly. So we don't have a specific date. I believe it will be in the early part of September. If you're moving to monthly reporting, do we still need to submit an annual report? Seems a little redundant. Roger, did you want to weigh in on that at all? Yeah.
Yes, I will take it. It does seem redundant, and it is redundant for the time being as we transition. As Roger said, this is a transition time. The CAR wasn't built to have it, obviously. It was an annual report, wasn't built to have it monthly. So we do look in the future, as you can expect that we will be moving towards that. More timely, submission of information so that we can get more timely review of the data. But for this time period, certainly in 2017, it will be a bit redundant to have the placement portion reported out and then the CAR reported at the end. But of course, as you remember, the placement piece is extremely important in order for the information you to put on the CAR, that you gather that information and verify employment either through the student or graduate. I know there are some questions about the placement verification. So let me just see some. I saw one, I don't remember, the incentive for the employers, what would be their incentive to respond to the PVP? That would be on the institution to ensure the importance of the employer and let them know the process is coming. We do say that it can be the graduate and or employer, so that it's either one. It doesn't need to be both, but you certainly want in your contacts with employers, and I understand how difficult that is and all the processes that might be involved in that, but certainly you certainly want to let the graduate know as well as the employer that something will be coming, and if either one of them confirm, then we would consider that to be an affirmative placement. And Roger's speaking to me to say that employers that are happy with their graduates would be very receptive to confirm the placements. And remember, this is 30 days out, so they would have some time to gather that information. We have a whole lot. We have about 10 minutes left. We'll try and get some more, but again, we will gather all these questions and see what other kind of priority items we can handle. There's a good question. What would happen if neither of them answer the PVP email? That would not be a confirmed placement then. That's the importance of ensuring that graduates or employers confirm these placements. And again, you will have the ability to see that information and can reach out further to the graduates and employers. But the expectation is that these students will confirm these placements through a process, and we know it's a change that will need to happen for the institutions to inform students and graduates, and that's something that will need to happen, that they do that to graduates and employers, let them know. And obviously you'll be dealing with graduates that have just happened, but it's something certainly that will need to be in the processes of every institution to inform them that this will be at the end of their road once they get a placement, that this is something that they will need to do. Duran's got one, so.
Hate to jump back and forth between the PVP and the CAR, but I see a question for the CAR. Do we need to report any discontinued programs offered during the 15-16 year on November 16th, on the November 2016 CAR? If you had graduates, yes. If you go to the member portal for program discontinuations, that definitely explains everything as far as whether it will need to be reported, but you should always notify us of your discontinued programs regardless of the CAR reporting period, and based off of the date, the CAR spreadsheets will determine whether you need a spreadsheet for that program or not. The date of discontinuation, that is.
There is a question, will copying and pasting data into Excel for CAR cause errors? You can copy and paste data into the spreadsheets there. I mean, I think as was mentioned earlier, there will be some cells that will require the selection of a drop-down menu choice. That will require some actual manual intervention in those cells, but you can paste cells from some other source into the spreadsheet. We ask that you do not insert rows into the spreadsheet. That's going to cause you problems, and you will get error messages if you insert rows as opposed to just pasting into the spreadsheet. But as long as you're just pasting into existing rows, that in and of itself will not cause an error.
So we have still a number of questions. We'll try, as I said, to get through the rest. But again, we know the importance of this. We want to get to all your questions, so we will try and do that. One question is, so placement waivers are no longer part of the formula. No, that's not correct. They are still part of the formula. It's just a drop down rather than a 1, so nothing's changed regarding the formula as it relates to those. We have some questions about kind of phone numbers versus emails. Our process is that it's through an automated email process. We do have the ability right now for either the graduate or employer to request a phone call, and that is something that we will be doing, still maintaining if that's what's required. If the graduate and or employer require an outreach by phone, we can do that. So that's certainly part of the PVP process. There's a number of questions about attestation and whether those are still acceptable. Remember, how we will be verifying placement is by the graduate and student. Essentially, that's an attestation, or I keep saying graduate and student, graduate and employer. Essentially, that is an attestation. They just have to get the email and do it. So the graduate and employer need to say, yes, I did this, but through our system, and in order for us to capture it, so that that we know that the information is accurate and validated. But attestations for placement by benefit, no, they should be documentation from the employer, again, that states the reasons for this. So, and on site, we'll be, again, using the PVP process and then calling students. So the documentation is important, but the way we'll be verifying placements is through essentially the placement verification program. So that's how we will ensure that we verify all these students. There's too many questions, I think, for us to answer all the rest of them. I thought we got through a bunch, but it looks like they keep rolling in. And we have 5 minutes left, and I'm overwhelmed with questions, which is not surprising. So as I said, what we will do, rather than try and answer 100 questions in 5 minutes, is to gather all these, compile them into certain areas, and obviously these are extremely important to upcoming processes for the 2016 CAR that's due in November, for the on-site visits that are taking place in just a few weeks, and for the PVP process that is up and going. So we will compile all these by section and get an FAQ out up on our web for this webinar, and it will be placed like we've done in the past a few times, similar to where the other webinars are. So you'll see them there. And rather than try and on the spot answer all these questions as well, we will get some further thought, because some of these obviously will require some further discussion and information. So with that said, I want to thank you all for your time. As you see the events, you'll find this webinar, which we recorded and will have up available on the events workshops, and then under webinars and under the aware, this will be the CAR the Campus Accountability Report and Placement Verification Program webinar. We will have, as I mentioned, a memo to the field webinar upcoming. We are finalizing the policies that have occurred at the August council meeting, and we'll have a memo to the field out in the next few days or week, and then have a webinar based on those policy changes, proposed policy changes as well. Another thing of note upcoming is if anybody is near Indianapolis, we have a renewal workshop on Thursday, and then importantly, for anybody that would like further information on the campus effectiveness planning process, we have a workshop on Friday, August 26th in Indianapolis. And with that said, I think we will close the webinar. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you very much for all of your insightful and thorough questions. And as I said, we will get those answered and out to you as quickly as possible. So again, thank you for your time.